ready to go?
Everyone. My name is Matt Schaefer. I'm really excited to be here. It's really inspiring for me to be a part of projects like this where we find and create and build community, not based on lines on a map, but based on things we share and a shared human experience. So I'm really excited to be here supporting all of our ELT family and our greater human family out in Puerto Rico. And excited to share with you something that's been really interesting and important for me in my time working here teaching English in Costa Rica, and hopefully something that's interesting and exciting for all of you. So one thing I've found a lot as I have been teaching adult classes here in this rural town in the Central Valley of Costa Rica is a lot of our students come to our school looking for English as a form of economic development. They understand the necessity and the skill and the opportunities that come in the job market with a conversational level of English. And one of the realities of that job market that I've heard a lot that has caused me a lot of curiosity and concern as a language teacher is when students come and tell me that they went to an interview and they were denied a position because they didn't have 100% English. And that's a phrase I've thought a lot about. As a lover of languages, as a teacher of English, I don't understand what 100% English is. I think about myself, and being honest, I'm a terrible speller. Earlier this week, I was leading a teacher training session on responding to inaccuracies, and I gave my peers many opportunities to respond to my inaccuracies in spelling. And some of those were intentional and some of them weren't. But I know what I've learned in terms of languages and healthy fluent language use, that fluent users of language typically speak at around 95% accuracy. So even when I'm thinking as a linguist, that number of 100% English, it hits me and I think, what does that mean? Because I don't think that number, if we're measuring language, really exists as a concept. And as I've grown and worked more with that, and even had a chance myself to freelance in that same tourist community, we live about 35 minutes away from one of the major tourism hubs of Costa Rica, which is La Fortuna. And it's an area where about 2 million people a year come through on vacation. And I realized that as I got into that freelancing market and writing web blogs and website descriptions for tourist companies, no one ever asked me or doubted if I had 100% English. And so it ended up crashing into something that I've been thinking a lot when I teach pronunciation. And that's the difference in accents. And when I talk about the two accents, I mean the two definitions of accent. And so the first definition of accent that I think about that's important for me to understand and bring to life in the classroom is accent defined as giving stress or emphasis to a particular syllable or word. So right now we have Rob out there working as a webmaster, and he will record this. And I hope that during my 10 minutes, we set a record for how many donations there are. So that's one element of individual syllable stress as accent, the change from record to record. Where I put the emphasis in a word changes the meaning. And that's a level of accent that language learners of English need to understand because it directly correlates to meaning and appropriateness of language. That same level of giving stress or emphasis expands to a sentence-wide level. It's the difference between me saying, "What are you wearing?" and "What are you wearing?" By changing which word I really hit with that accent or that word stress, I can change the whole meaning of a sentence. And again, that's something that I want my students to be able to understand and play with as they're expressing themselves in English. So that for me is one definition of the word accent, giving stress or emphasis to a particular syllable of word. The other definition of accent that I think it's really important that we as teachers are aware of and bring into the classroom in a constructive and critical way is accent as the identity contained within a particular way of speaking. So while I live in Costa Rica, I'm from California. That gives me a particular speaking pattern, a particular diction, and a way of using English to communicate myself based on who I am and where I grew up. Also, the music I listen to has influenced my accent. The activities and the communities and the lowercase c cultures that I'm a part of all play into my accent, right? And that the sum of that is my identity. And when I come back to that idea of 100% English, to me, I think there's a value in there that's hidden. It's what's not being said. And what, to me, that 100% English is focused on is the second category of accent. It's a way of telling someone your English isn't good enough because of the identity your English shows. And while I think about what it means to respond to inaccuracies in terms of comprehensibility, when we're talking about the accent of single letter or word stresses, I think about what values is my classroom presenting and reinforcing if I tell a student that their accent based on their identity is incorrect, right? Is there such a thing as an incorrect identity? Now, my personal belief on that topic is no. I don't see that. I have a deep love of poetry. And as I study modern poetry, for me, the frontier of that is the voice. And so every time I hear a new voice speaking English in a new way, to me, we're just adding colors to the way that English is spoken. We're increasing its artistic and expressive potential. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. And so this comes up to me a lot in the classroom. When a student comes up and they're wondering about a word and they say, how do you say that? And now it's my job as a teacher to respond to that. I find that one of the most important things I can do to communicate that value to my student, that what's important to me is that they're understood and that they're valued for who they are, is by owning my pronunciation as a result of who I am. And so if a student asks me to pronounce a word, I'll pronounce it and say, this is how I say it as someone who grew up in Northern California. And if I have the knowledge, I'll offer and say, oh, this is how a friend of mine who's from South Carolina says the word. Oh, and I have a coworker who is teaching English right now in Honduras, and she says the word like this. Because I think there's a range of possibilities that are infinite of how words can be said, being understood, and also communicating who we are. And that is, for me, a goal of language. And so I think it's important that I present that to students. I think to go deeper than just, this is a correct pronunciation and this is an incorrect pronunciation. And giving students a chance to engage critically with that, to think about not just, am I being understood, but who do I want to be as I speak English? One of the things that I've had an incredible opportunity in living here at this teacher training center is I've gotten to know and come into contact with incredible teachers from all over the region, from 20, 30 different countries. And that's come at a pivotal moment in my own language learning as I've gained fluency in Spanish. And because of that exposure to all these different colors of Spanish that come from all over the world, I've been able to use my poet's ear and really define a Spanish that expresses me, right? Define how is it that I want to be heard in English or in Spanish. And that's the kind of critical thinking I want my students to come to. Because I don't want my students to think that my goal is that they all sound like they're from California. Studies actually show that in a group of English users, if you've got a mix of native English speakers and non-native English speakers in the room, that the native English speakers will have the most troubles being understood and understanding. And the theory behind that is that a non-native English speaker has potentially in their learning been exposed to many different types of voices. they're more often in intercultural communication situations where they're interacting with global English and different types of global Englishes. And that multiplicity of exposure creates a broader level of comprehension and comprehensibility. Whereas native English speakers often are held into this frame. And so I really want my students able to think about, who do I want to be as I speak English, and having the space to develop that critically. So thank you very much for sharing the space with me to share that important bit. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. And I'm excited to keep being here with you all as we all support Puerto Rico and come together as a world community.